Russian officials say Ukrainian helicopters have carried out a strike on a fuel storage facility in the west of Russia. Emergency services say 170 personnel are trying to put out the flames in Belgorod.
How did drones costing less than a single fighter jet mission disrupt Russia's oil industry? In the early hours, a fireball lit up the night sky over the Ilski Refinery, one of Russia's largest private oil facilities, processing over 6 million tons annually. With a single strike, Ukraine forced a critical node in Russia's energy network offline, exposing a vulnerability few anticipated. This was not a $1 million missile, but a $100,000 kamikaze drone targeting infrastructure worth hundreds of millions. The scale of damage compared to the cost of attack signals a new phase in the conflict, where ingenuity and precision reshape the battlefield. The implications for Russia's economy and military logistics are only beginning to unfold. Ukraine's tactical advantage: small drones, big impact. Ukraine's ability to turn small, low-cost drones into strategic weapons has altered the landscape of modern warfare. The use of UJ-26 Boba kamikaze drones, each costing roughly $90,000 to $100,000, against high-value targets like the Ilski Oil Refinery, demonstrates a tactical logic rooted in asymmetry. Instead of matching Russia's military might with expensive missile strikes, Ukraine deploys compact, expendable aircraft capable of slipping past air defenses and striking with precision. The impact is measured not just in destroyed infrastructure, but in the forced recalibration of Russia's logistics and supply chains. Ilski's significance is clear. Situated in southern Russia, this refinery processes more than 6 million tons of crude oil annually, producing diesel, gasoline, and fuel oil, vital to both the domestic market and Russia's military operations. Its direct supply line to Russian troops in occupied Ukrainian territories makes it a priority target. During the strike, Ukrainian drones destroyed diesel hydrocracking units and 3 major storage tanks, immediately cutting the refinery's processing capacity by about 30%. This single blow halted fuel for approximately 700 of the 2,400 tanker trucks Russia relies on daily to sustain its front lines. The loss of this throughput is not just a logistical challenge. It is a disruption that reverberates through every echelon of Russia's war effort. The consequences of this disruption force Russia to adapt its supply routes dramatically. With Ilski's output crippled, fuel must now be transported from facilities up to 400 kilometers farther away. This extension of supply lines introduces new vulnerabilities. Each additional kilometer increases the risk of interception and delays, and the need for extra coordination draws resources away from the front. The longer routes are more exposed to further drone attacks, and the logistical strain compounds as Russia scrambles to compensate for the sudden shortfall. The efficiency of Ukraine's approach is evident. A single drone strike, costing a fraction of traditional airstrikes, compels Russia to spend millions on repairs, rerouting, and additional security. Beyond fire and smoke, each explosion sends a loud message that no refinery, even one deep inside Russia, can hide from Ukrainian drones. The psychological effect of these attacks is immediate. The perception of invulnerability that once shielded Russia's critical infrastructure is eroding. For Russian officials, oil executives, and the wider public, the realization that even well-defended facilities are within reach of Ukrainian drones introduces a persistent sense of uncertainty. This shift in perception is itself a strategic victory, as it forces Moscow to divert attention, funding, and manpower to the defense of assets previously considered safe. The military implications are equally significant. Diesel is the lifeblood of mechanized warfare, powering tanks, trucks, and support vehicles. With Ilski's capacity slashed, Russia faces an immediate reduction in available fuel. This limits troop mobility, delays ammunition shipments, and constrains basic operational capabilities. At the same time, Sanctions and international isolation hinder Russia's ability to import additional supplies or quickly repair damaged facilities. The result is a cascading series of logistical challenges that strain the country's ability to maintain its military tempo. Ukraine's use of kamikaze drones represents more than just a tactical adaptation. It is a deliberate application of asymmetric warfare. By leveraging affordable, precise technology, Ukraine exposes the limits of Russia's conventional military spending. Tanks and fighter jets offer little protection against small, elusive drones targeting infrastructure deep behind the front lines. Each successful strike forces Russia to redirect resources, funds, personnel, and equipment away from offensive operations and toward the protection and restoration of critical infrastructure. This diversion of resources creates a feedback loop of vulnerability and reactive spending. As the pattern of these attacks continues, the strain on Russia's logistics and military operations grows. Refineries, storage depots, and supply lines across the country become potential targets, requiring constant vigilance and investment in defense. The cost of defending against persistent, low-cost threats rises, while the effectiveness of Russia's traditional military assets diminishes. The Ilski strike is not an isolated incident, but part of a broader campaign designed to erode Russia's capacity to sustain its war effort. This evolving dynamic sets the stage for wider consequences. As Ukraine's tactical innovations disrupt Russia's military logistics, the effects ripple outward, challenging the foundation of Russia's oil-dependent economy and its ability to finance ongoing operations. The ripple effect, Russia's oil dependency under siege. As the physical damage at Ilski reverberates through Russia's energy networks, the broader vulnerability of the country's oil dependency becomes clear. The loss of 30% of Ilski's processing capacity is not an isolated, technical setback. It disrupts a critical node in Russia's supply chain, removing enough output to halt fuel deliveries for approximately 700 of the 2,400 tanker trucks dispatched daily to the front lines. This immediate reduction in throughput forces Russia to rely on more distant refineries, stretching logistics and exposing new weaknesses in the system. The strain on Russia's wider oil sector is magnified by the cumulative impact of successive strikes. Across all major refinery attacks this year, Russia has lost about 15% of its diesel output and 20% of its high-sulfur fuel oil exports. These figures reflect a pattern of attrition that undermines both the domestic market and Russia's export capacity. High-sulfur fuel oil, in particular, is a crucial export commodity, and the decline in volumes directly reduces hard currency earnings. The shrinking supply squeezes domestic distribution networks, forcing rationing and creating bottlenecks that ripple outward through military and civilian sectors alike. Financial consequences follow quickly. The Russian Ministry of Finance reported a 1.2 trillion ruble shortfall in energy export tax revenue in the first half of the year, with projections indicating a deeper deficit as attacks persist. This loss is not just a budgetary inconvenience. Energy revenues underpin a significant portion of Moscow's spending, funding everything from military operations to social welfare programs. The growing gap between expected and actual receipts places mounting pressure on the Kremlin's ability to meet obligations at home and abroad. Insurance markets have responded to the escalating risk. After the Ilski attack, global reinsurers pulled back, and risk premiums for fuel terminals and pipeline exit stations in the Krasnodar region rose by 3 percentage points. The withdrawal of foreign reinsurers means Russian state-owned energy companies must increasingly self-insure, absorbing losses that would otherwise be spread across international markets. This shift adds another layer of financial strain, as funds once earmarked for expansion or modernization are diverted to cover potential future damage. The export landscape has also shifted. With refinery capacity diminished, Russia is forced to sell its crude oil at a significant discount to global benchmarks. The widening Urals-Brent spread erodes profit margins and reduces the inflow of foreign currency. Lower export volumes and declining prices combine to weaken the ruble, fueling inflation and raising the cost of imported goods. As operational costs climb and revenues fall, the government faces difficult choices about which sectors to support and where to impose cuts. Investor confidence has deteriorated in parallel. In May, demand for ruble-denominated government bonds fell 40% short of expectations, while interest rates rose to 15.5%. Higher borrowing costs make it more expensive for the state to finance deficits, and the lack of investor appetite signals deepening skepticism about Russia's economic trajectory. The consequences extend to public spending, with planned social and defense outlays coming under increasing scrutiny. The government must now weigh the political risks of cutting domestic programs against the strategic imperative of sustaining the war effort. The cascading effects of these disruptions reach into every corner of Russian society. As the oil sector contracts, inflation accelerates and the purchasing power of ordinary citizens declines. Supply chain interruptions lead to fuel shortages in some regions, while rising prices for basic goods erode public confidence. The government's ability to maintain stability, both economic and social, depends on its success in containing these pressures, but each new strike on critical infrastructure chips away at that foundation. This sustained campaign against Russia's oil infrastructure is more than a series of isolated incidents. It is a deliberate effort to exploit a central vulnerability and force the Kremlin into a reactive posture. The need to defend, repair, and reroute energy flows diverts resources from other priorities and exposes the limits of Russia's capacity to adapt. The cumulative effect is a slow but persistent erosion of the economic base that supports both the state and its military ambitions. As the material costs mount, another front begins to open, one that is less tangible but no less consequential. The psychological impact of these attacks is starting to register, not only among policymakers and business leaders, but also across the wider Russian public. The sense of security that once surrounded the country's critical infrastructure is fading, replaced by uncertainty and growing anxiety about what might come next. A nation on edge, the psychological fallout. For many Russians, the psychological fallout of Ukraine's refinery strikes is immediate and personal. In recent months, residents near Moscow have reported hearing the buzz of drones at night, a sound once thought impossible, so far from the front. These attacks, no longer confined to distant border regions, now reach deep into the Russian heartland. The spectacle of burning refineries and fuel depots has become a recurring feature in the national consciousness, undermining the Kremlin's claims of security and control. A nation on edge responds in visible ways. The aftermath of the Ilski Refinery attack triggered panic buying and long lines at gas stations, not just in major cities, but in key grain-producing regions like Krasnodar and Stavropol. Here, fuel hoarding is no longer a rumor, but a daily reality, as drivers queue for hours to fill their tanks, fearing further shortages. These scenes highlight a spreading anxiety about the government's ability to guarantee essential supplies, particularly as wartime pressures mount. The psychological effect is amplified by the realization that if critical infrastructure can be struck so easily, the guarantees of daily life, fuel, food, economic stability, are no longer certain. Investor confidence is caught in the same spiral. Oligarchs and large asset holders have stepped up transfers from rubles to foreign currencies, accelerating capital outflows. The demand for ruble-denominated government bonds has collapsed, falling 40% below official projections. Every ruble that leaves the country puts additional pressure on the currency, which in turn erodes savings and purchasing power for ordinary citizens. The weakening ruble forces the central bank to intervene, selling foreign currency reserves to stem the decline. but each intervention depletes the country's ability to weather future shocks. This cycle of asset flight and currency instability is both a symptom and a driver of the broader sense of national unease. Even Russia's top leaders admit the strain. At the St. Petersburg Universal Finance Forum, Economic Development Minister Maxim Reshetnikov acknowledged, "Yes, we are currently calming down based on the numbers. It seems to me that we are on the brink of a transition to stagnation." Elvira Nabiullina, head of the central bank, has stated that the country's recent growth relied on free labor resources, which are now largely exhausted. These candid admissions from senior officials puncture the image of a government in control, fueling public doubts about the future. The head of Sberbank described the situation as a storm that has reached its peak, a rare public acknowledgement of the scale of the economic and psychological pressures now facing the country. The consequences reach beyond the financial elite. Ordinary Russians see the signs of instability in their daily lives: fuel shortages, rising prices, and delays in social payments. In rural regions, where agriculture depends on reliable fuel supplies, disruptions at refineries like Ilski threaten not just mobility, but the harvest itself. As inflation accelerates and the cost of basic goods rises, families feel the strain. The government, forced to choose between military spending and social support, risks eroding the social compact that has underpinned Putin's leadership for decades. Public trust, once a cornerstone of Kremlin stability, is now under sustained pressure. Each new strike, each image of fire and smoke, reinforces a perception of vulnerability. The psychological warfare waged by these attacks is not limited to the battlefield. It shapes how Russians view their leaders, their economy, and their future. The cycle of anxiety and adaptation becomes self-reinforcing as fear of further attacks leads to behaviors, hoarding, capital flight, currency conversion, that deepen the very vulnerabilities the government is struggling to contain. In this environment, the distinction between economic and psychological damage disappears. The strikes on oil infrastructure are not just about lost barrels of fuel, they are about lost confidence, both in the government's ability to protect its people and in the long-term viability of the Russian system. The psychological tremors now running through Russian society set the stage for deeper, more structural challenges. As the costs of maintaining the war effort rise and the systems designed to support it begin to falter, the question of sustainability moves from the abstract to the urgent. The long game, strategic burdens, and economic decline. Strategic burdens for Russia are mounting as the war effort reshapes the country's economy and exposes deep vulnerabilities. The 2025 defense budget is set to reach 13.1 trillion rubles, 6.3% of GDP, a level not seen since the final years of the Soviet Union. This unprecedented allocation signals a decisive shift in national priorities, with military spending crowding out investment in sectors like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The Kremlin's commitment to sustaining military operations comes at the expense of long-term development and stability, tightening the economic vice as sanctions, inflation, and dwindling reserves take their toll. Civilians are now sewn into the war machine, tank production lines and university graduates pressed into military roles, illustrating a brain drain from the economy. This mobilization of the civilian workforce serves immediate wartime needs, but draws skilled labor away from industries vital for future recovery. As the state redirects resources and labor toward military production, other sectors face neglect, weakening the broader economic foundation and increasing dependency on government intervention. The consequences are visible in slowed innovation, reduced productivity, and a shrinking pool of expertise outside the defense sector. Western sanctions have sharply limited Russia's access to foreign technology, cutting off imports of critical chips and engines. In response, Russian arms production now relies on lower-grade substitutes and black market supply chains. The result is a measurable decline in equipment reliability. Frontline reports document the increased failure rate of retrofitted tanks using outdated electronics and engines. The arms industry's reliance on inferior components undermines battlefield performance and further erodes the Kremlin's ability to sustain a high-tech war. The lack of access to quality parts is not just a technical issue. It is a strategic liability that compounds with every month the conflict drags on. The financial buffer that once insulated Russia from external shocks is rapidly evaporating. The National Wealth Fund, designed to absorb fiscal emergencies, saw its liquid ruble-denominated assets drop to 32 billion by February. Independent bank assessments suggest the actual cash available may be less than half that figure. As costs for repairs, defense, and emergency spending spike, this shrinking reserve leaves the Kremlin with fewer options to stabilize the economy or address the damage caused by attacks like the one on Ilski. The gap between declining oil revenues and rising expenditures is widening, especially as Russia is forced to sell Urals crude at a discount, further reducing state income. To bridge budget deficits, the government increasingly turns to central bank money printing. While this approach provides short-term liquidity, it accelerates inflation and reduces household purchasing power. Rising prices for goods and services erode the standard of living, and visible shortages, especially of fuel, underscore the war's direct impact on daily life. With each new round of emergency funding, the gap between official narratives and economic realities grows wider. The strain is not limited to spreadsheets or macroeconomic indicators. It plays out in long lines at gas stations, delayed public payments, and the steady erosion of social services. The economic consequences of Ukraine's strikes on oil infrastructure reverberate through every level of Russian society. Each attack, such as the one at Ilski, forces the Kremlin to divert resources from offensive operations to patching logistical gaps. Extended supply lines and increased costs for fuel transport stretch the military budget and slow operational tempo. The focus shifts from advancing on the battlefield to maintaining basic supply and repair functions, exposing the fragility of Russia's logistical systems. As military spending balloons, public programs, and local infrastructure projects face cuts, deepening the hardship for ordinary citizens and eroding trust in the government's ability to provide stability. The cumulative effect is a feedback loop. Increased military spending fuels economic decline, which in turn limits the resources available for the war effort. The Kremlin faces a narrowing set of choices, forced to balance the demands of the front with the growing discontent at home. The attacks on strategic infrastructure have shifted the locus of conflict from distant battlefields to the core of Russia's economic and political system, illustrating how economic warfare can destabilize even a resource-rich state. This transformation of warfare, where financial, logistical, and psychological pressures weigh as heavily as military maneuvers, signals a new era in conflict. The consequences are still unfolding, but the trajectory is clear. The capacity to wage war is now inseparable from the resilience of the systems that sustain a nation. That fireball over Ilski was more than a flash in the sky. It was a fuse lit under Russia's economy and morale. Ukraine's tactical use of kamikaze drones has demonstrated that low-cost, precise strikes can undermine a larger adversary's critical infrastructure, shifting the balance of conflict away from conventional force toward economic and psychological disruption. These operations illustrate how modern warfare now pivots on targeting systems that support a nation, not just its armies. The impact reaches far beyond the battlefield, challenging the foundations of stability and resilience. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit like to support deeper analysis of how technology reshapes war, and subscribe for more CyberMac insights.